the statements that the larger disc-shaped object passes behind the tether, making it quite a large UFO of some description. I would like to analyse that and show my analysis of where I think the object actually passes in front of the tether. Watch the Airy Disc near the tether come in and out of focus as the NASA camera focuses on the tether. Left of screen, the Airy Disc notch starts at the top. As it moves right, the notch changes to the bottom. This means it's an in-camera effect. This happens as the object moves from one side of the frame to the other, and that notch is an in-camera effect, not on the object itself. The Airy Discs form as the camera zooms in. They are now out of focus. Example of the objects passing in front of the tether, not behind, as some have suggested. The black exposure line to the right of the tether is an important aspect to look when viewing the objects passing in front. They block out that exposure line. This can only happen if an object passes in front of the tether, because the black line is not part of the tether itself. It's a nature of video footage and can only be blacked out if something passes in front of it. If the object passes behind the tether, then the black exposure line would remain there because the tether is brighter than the Airy Disc itself. Note the distortion in that object at the top there. If the object was passing behind the tether, you would not get those lines of the tether being distorted in that manner. This bottom object also passes in front of the tether. The black line on the right hand side of the tether, being an exposure effect, not actually on the tether, is being covered by the object in front. I have used a manual focus to deliberately make the object out of focus, and this creates what's called an Airy Disc. I use this to emphasize the flickering of the flame within the garbage bag, and you can see the similarity of the Airy Disc nature of this object to the ones in the tether footage. We need to establish here that the objects regarding this analysis is the larger orb type or Airy Disc type object going either in front or behind the top of the tether. The debate on this subject is not if any objects at all go behind the tether. It is based on the statements that these larger orbs or objects go in front or behind the tether. What we are trying to establish whether these larger objects are in fact exactly what you see is large diameter orbs or disc UFOs, in other words. If so, this makes these objects extremely large. Or if they go in front of the tether and there are in fact an out of focus smaller illumination, which is my side of the debate. Right. You can see in this footage where the Airy Disc passes along the top of the tether. The top of the tether becomes more out of focus and fuzzy. The black line or exposure line to the right hand side becomes dull. It lightens up, not as pronounced. Therefore the object, which is the Airy Disc, not quite as illuminated as the tether, is passing in front of the tether. As the Airy Disc passes in front of the black line, the slot in the Airy Disc allows a little bit more of that black exposure line to be exposed, and then it is recovered again as the Airy Disc moves. And then after the Airy Disc has passed beyond the tether, the top of the tether and the black line becomes clearer and more sharp. Therefore, the Airy Disc is passing in front of the tether. When the notch passes over the black line, even on the best footage, the black line brightens up a bit. You can see the black line through the notch on the Airy Disc. Then the Airy Disc continues over the tether, and the black line at the top of the tether is being covered by the Airy Disc, which is semi-transparent because it's an out of focus, closer object than what the tether is, and I'll demonstrate this next. And I stand by my statement that this disc is an out of focus, closer object passing in front of the tether. When the notch passes over the black line, even on the best footage, the black line brightens up a bit. You can see the black line through the notch on the Airy Disc. Then the Airy Disc continues over the tether, and the black line at the top of the tether is being covered by the Airy Disc, which is semi-transparent because it's an out of focus, closer object than what the tether is, and I'll demonstrate this next. And I stand by my statement that this disc is an out of focus, closer object passing in front of the tether. I can demonstrate the depth of field between the camera, the tether and the object by using the following bit of footage. In this clip, infinity is the full capacity of the lens adjusted to infinity. On the right hand side we have C, which is the camera, and on the bottom of that will be a moving graph which will indicate where the Airy Disc comes into focus. The space shuttle is approximately 400 miles above the Earth, and we could estimate the distance when this Airy Disc object comes into focus if the spacecraft was travelling approximately 8 miles per second. We could estimate how far away the object is when it does come into focus. This exercise is used as a demonstration in how we could estimate the depth of field and how far the objects are away from the camera. So what's the movement of this object? Instead of being smooth like that, it's actually like this, which means it's in front of the tether.
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground.
The movement of a little over half the field of view of the tether in relation to an object closer. The object that's closer will really appear to move more in the field of view, mainly because the field of view is narrower the closer you get to the camera. So this is what I'm trying to use, this variation in movement of the objects in relation to the tether, to determine whether they're actually in front or behind the tether. imagine the camera's shake. This dot here is equal distance from the top of the field of view, for example, and when the camera jolts, the top of the tether is about not quite equal distance from the bottom, so it moves approximately a bit over half a frame of a field of view, half the field of view at that distance. So the dot, or the object closer to the camera, would appear to move more than an object at the distance of the tether. And that is exactly what you see happening here. Take special note of the relationship between the movement of the larger object and the movement of the lower edge of the stabilized frame. Compare this with the rubber band demonstration and the field of view demonstration, and you will see this principle at work. If any of these objects or larger objects that move to a greater degree than the tether itself were actually behind the tether, then you would not get this movement, because anything beyond the distance of the tether, especially when it's stabilized, would not get this movement. You can actually do an experiment to explain this to yourself. If you stand in a street where there's a row of houses, a row of fences, a row of trees, and then bend your knees to lower your point of vision a couple of inches, take note of the movement of objects related to one another that are close to you. See how they move in relation to one another, and then mid-view you'll see that they move even less. And distance way off, you'll see that you cannot determine any movement in relation to them, especially when you go to great distance. The objects behind the furthest distance ones will not seem to move at all. This is the depth of field and the way that movement of objects in relation to one another when your depth of field varies from close up to long distance or infinity. And this is what we're looking at with the tether footage.
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
If you look closely at these two clips side by side, you can see the Airy Disc obscuring part of the top of the tether. And this means that this Airy Disc is in front of the tether. The sunlight is shining on the tether, being a solid object, making it 30 to 40% brighter than the Airy Disc, which is not a solid object, but an out-of-focus smaller object. Therefore, because the tether is 30 to 40% brighter than the Airy Disc, it appears to be actually in front of the Airy Disc, when in fact it is behind and shining through the semi-transparent Airy Disc, giving an optical illusion or a misleading visual effect. If in fact the Airy Disc was a solid object like the tether, the reflection of sunlight would be even greater than the tether. All of these objects move in front of the tether.